Good morning, I'm Adam Sexton. America's 41st president, George H.W. Bush, was laid to rest last week, and the nation is mourning the loss of not just a commander-in-chief, but one of the greatest men of the greatest generation. Here to discuss the Bush legacy this morning is Senator Judd Gregg. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Adam, thanks for having me on.
We appreciate your time. So you were at the services in Washington this last week.
Yes.
What were some of the things that struck you about the tribute this nation paid to the 41st president?
Well, hopefully a lot of people watched it because it was really a statement of what a person should do and how they should live their lives if they want to get involved in public service. The whole theme of all the statements that were made, all the speeches which were given, was the fact that this was a man who committed his whole life to public service, that he was about decency, grace, humility, but also strength and courage, and that he led from gathering people together and getting an agreement as versus trying to force his way onto the opinion and make people follow him who may disagree with him. He was a uniquely effective president in a very, very difficult time where you had the fall of the Soviet Union, where you had Saddam Hussein invade Kuwait, and where you had a lot of social issues that needed to be addressed.
Let's turn back the clock a little bit to 1979 and 1980. His first bid for the presidency came here to New Hampshire. It's my understanding he basically lived at the Gregg household there as he was making his way around the Granite State.
He did. It was sort of interesting. Back in 78 and 79, he was an asterisk. Nobody knew him. My father, who was very active in politics throughout his life, decided to run his campaign. They'd both gone to Yale. They were both in the CIA, although it was a CIC when my father was in it. And literally Barbara and George came to our house. We used to, my wife Kathy and I used to stop by regularly because we lived in Nashua. I was in the governor's council at the time, and every morning, he and my father would get in my father's blue beat-up Chevrolet station wagon, and off they'd go to a Rotary Club or to some other event where George Bush would make the case for why he should be the president. And then, of course, we had the famous Nashua debate. He'd won Iowa, and then we had the Nashua debate, which Ronald Reagan used those famous words, "I paid for this microphone, Mr. Green," even though the fellow's name was Breen. And that ended that. It was sort of like game, set, match, and then he was picked as vice president. What did George Bush say to you coming off of that stage in Nashua after Reagan had had that moment and the crowd erupted as soon as he's made that comment? Well, I had ended up advancing it actually for my father and for George Bush, and he was again at my father's house with Jim Baker. David Gergen was there, and I called him in the late afternoon, and I said, you know, this was supposed to be a debate between, well, people wouldn't remember, but between President Reagan and George Bush, because he'd won Iowa. Yeah. We tried to get a one-on-one debate. But in that race were some powerful people. There was Bob Dole, Howard Baker, Jack Kemp, Phil Crane. I mean, these were influential national figures. About 6 o'clock, I noticed that the lead people for the other campaigns were starting to arrive at the Nashua High School, and I thought, wow, something's going on here we don't know about. So I called, and I talked to Jim Baker. I said, something's happening. So Jim Baker came down, and we went in to meet with Len Nofsinger. Nofsinger said, we're going to invite them all up on the stage. Baker said, no, that's not the rules. That we have an agreement. It's just George Bush and Ronald Reagan. So what happened was Ronald Reagan invited them all up on the stage. John Breen said, turn his microphone off, and that was it.
Was Bush upset after that? Was he?
Well, you know, no, he wasn't. It was interesting because I drove them back to the airport that night, Howard Baker, Jim Baker, and in the car, I was driving, but I was listening to the conversation. It was basically them saying, we're going to, yeah, this was bad. This is going to affect us here, but we're going to push on. We're going to win. And you know, this President Bush lost a number of races, and of course he was shot down. But he was an inherently resilient guy. He did not accept defeat as something that was going to be lasting. He always looked towards the next event.
When Bush was vice president, you were in Congress. Typically the vice president has a job to do of kind of staying out of the way, but they do maintain that relationship with Capitol Hill. What was it like working with him in that capacity? Well,
we were pretty close to him, Kathy and I, because of the fact that we'd worked so hard for them in New Hampshire. So we stayed in regular contact. We talked occasionally, and with some regularity actually, about the issues which are coming forward and that President Reagan was pushing forward. And occasionally we'd get together, especially with his son Neil, who had actually literally lived with us, and in fact met his first wife. She was from Hollis, here in New Hampshire.
And then as he became president, you were governor. What do you think it meant to have George H.W. Bush at the helm as the Soviet Union collapsed?
I think if he hadn't been there, there would have been a distinct possibility that we could have been in a very difficult situation as a world. You have to remember, this was a country that was coming apart, the Soviet Union, that had nuclear weapons. And had somebody succeeded Gorbachev, who was a militarist dictator type of individual with nuclear weapons, who knows where it would have led to. But because President Bush was so good at policy and so good at diplomacy, because he'd been doing it almost all his life, he was able to work all the different parts, and he never tried to embarrass the people of Russia. He understood that they had great pride in them, in their nation and in their culture. And so when the Berlin Wall fell, the famous statement is, he didn't dance on the wall. He said that to Gorbachev. And it gave Gorbachev running room to basically move the Soviet Union forward in a way that finally led to Yeltsin becoming a democracy, and Yeltsin becoming president. Ironically, the first time Yeltsin came to the United States, and they had a state dinner for him, President Bush was kind enough to invite Kathy and I to the dinner, and I got to sit with the new elected president of Russia.
What made him such an effective diplomat? You know, there's that media narrative through the 80s. I don't know if it was the proximity to Reagan or what, but that infamous Newsweek cover referring to the wimp factor. But of course, and he's a World War II combat pilot. It's almost unthinkable that somebody would say something like that now. But how did he's the nice guy. How was he such an effective diplomat, being a nice guy?
Because people knew he was uniquely strong, and even though he didn't shout that he was going to get where he wanted to go, and that he carried the message of America so effectively, and America's message was strength, freedom, and a commitment to liberty. And he made that message resonate in a way that allowed people to be attracted to us rather than pushed away from us. And that was just his style. And that Newsweek article was a totally disreputable event, in my opinion, because he was just the opposite. He wasn't verbose, and he didn't talk about himself, he wasn't a great self-promoter, but his strength was unique, and it had been shown in his personal courage during the war and in the way he led the country.
What did you learn from him? Obviously, you were already involved in politics when he came here to run for president the first time, but just from observing him operate, what did you learn from President Bush?
Well, to be truthful, he was a lot like my father. Those folks of that generation who got into government, they did it because they felt it was an obligation to give back. The public service was a purpose. It wasn't for them, it was about other people. And they basically expected you to do public service without getting anything out of it other than making the country better or the state better, and that was that is his legacy. It was also my father's legacy, in my opinion.
Indeed. Governor Hugh Gregg. And on the flip side of that, how did New Hampshire make an imprint on President Bush, do you think? Obviously, Maine and Texas are the two states you think of when you think of the Bushes, but New Hampshire was a real political crucible for him here. Yeah,
well, it was, and he had so many friends here because he stayed in touch with people, as did Barbara, by the way. And they met people all over the state, and everybody got a note. And over the years, they developed a cadre of friends here that was is very deep. Of course, he had the famous "Thank you, New Hampshire" line, which basically he got back in the race as a result of New Hampshire in 1992, putting him back in the front row of the effort. So he and Barbara Bush had a unique friendship and relationship with so many people here in New Hampshire. It would be hard to number them.
And a big picture question here, but what is the legacy of President Bush to the country?
Leadership. Leadership through decency, grace, humility, and strength, and carrying the message of America, of liberty and freedom aggressively around the world in a way that creates partnerships rather than pushes people away.
And do you think, as the country mourns that president, they're also mourning the way in which he led?
Yeah, we need another leader like George Bush or even Ronald Reagan, very much Ronald Reagan. People who are leaders because they understand the greatness of America, but also understand that it's not about them. It's about the American people and about the statement America makes to the rest of the world that gives the rest of the world hope for liberty.
Senator Judd Gregg, we thank you for your reminiscences.
Thank you, Ad.
We appreciate it.